past midnight. A packed town hall in Texas. 7 council members at the front of the room. 5 of them just raised their hands to approve a project almost nobody in the room wanted. And then the mayor said something that should not have been said out loud. He said the council voted yes because they were afraid of being sued. Sued by a church with more money than the entire town. This is not a conspiracy theory. It was on camera. It was reported by every major Dallas outlet. Residents in the overflow room heard it live, and the project was a Mormon temple. But here is what almost no one noticed. At the exact same time, those fights were unfolding in Texas, in Wyoming, in Utah, in Nevada. Something else was happening inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Something the headlines missed. The strategy was changing. Quietly, from the top. The design started shrinking. The lighting started dimming. The lawyers started moving earlier. And then, in October of 2025, the new president of the church walked to a pulpit in Salt Lake City and said 6 words that stopped an entire pattern that had defined the church for almost a decade. We will get to those words. But first, 5 changes. 5 specific, documented, verifiable shifts in how this church is building temples in 2026. And why every one of them tells you something the institution will never say directly. Because this is not a story about buildings. This is a story about who controls the physical landscape of American towns, who decides how tall a tower can stand in a residential neighborhood, who decides how bright a light can shine through your bedroom window at 3 in the morning, and what happens when the answer to those questions stops being the people who actually live there. Stay with me, because by the end, you are going to see this institution differently than you did 5 minutes ago. Part 1. The designs are shrinking. Start with what you can see. For most of the last decade, Mormon temples were getting bigger, not smaller, bigger. Russell Nelson, who led the church from 2018 until his death in September of 2025, announced 200 new temples in under 8 years. Read that number again, 200. He doubled the global footprint of the institution in one lifetime. And the early designs matched the ambition. Massive buildings, towers reaching over 170 feet into residential skylines. Floor plans sized for regional populations, not small-town neighborhoods. Fairview, Texas was supposed to be one of those temples. The original proposal, 44,000 square feet, a spire of 174 feet, dropped into a town-zoned residential with a height limit of 35 feet. 35 feet. Versus 174. That is the equivalent of dropping a 17-story building into a neighborhood of 1-story houses, with the rooftops of the existing homes not even reaching the knees of the proposed spire. The council said no in August of 2024. And then something interesting happened. The church did not walk away. It did not sue immediately. It sat down at a mediation table in November of 2024. Weeks of closed-door negotiation. When the new design came out, the footprint had dropped to 30,000 square feet. The spire had dropped to 120 feet. The building went from 2 stories to 1, still far above the zoning code, but a massive concession from the first number. 54 feet shaved off the spire, 13,000 square feet removed from the footprint. That is not an accident. That is a blueprint. Across multiple contested sites in the United States, the church is now opening negotiations with designs that have compromise already built into them. The first number is always ambitious. The second number is always smaller. What stays constant is the symbolic core, the height of the spire, the visibility from a distance, the scale of the ceremonial interior. Church officials have been clear about the symbolism. For members, the spire points toward heaven. It is not decoration. It is theology made visible in steel and stone, which is why the concessions stop exactly where the symbolism begins. Change number 1. Every temple proposal is now designed to shrink. It is priced in before the first community meeting happens. But shrinking the building was the easy part, because the next fight was about something the church had never negotiated before, something that touched the most intimate space in a neighbor's life. Part 2. The lights go dim. For decades, Mormon temples were lit 24 hours a day, floodlights on every facade, uplighting on the stone, a spire that glowed through the night. For members, the light was sacred, a constant visual reminder of what they consider the house of the Lord. For neighbors, it was something else entirely. A beacon pointed directly at their bedrooms. Cody, Wyoming, March 31st, 2026. The church tested the lighting on its newly finished 101-foot temple for the first time. One neighbor, who lives immediately next door, told reporters the light came through nearly every window of his house. He pointed out that most of his windows faced the temple. He said he was not sure anyone could get used to it, especially during winter, when the sun sets at 4:30 in the afternoon and the temple glow becomes the dominant light in the sky until dawn. Another neighbor photographed her own bedroom, lit up like noon at midnight. Her sunrooms, which wrap around her house, were flooded. She priced blackout curtains, $15,000 at the introductory rate, over $21,000 if she waited past the deadline. She sent the quote to the Cody City Council, along with photographs, along with a written statement that she had understood, from the beginning, that the light would not cross her property line. And here is the part that should make you pause. After construction on the temple began, the Cody City Council quietly amended its own lighting ordinance. The new version only covers commercial properties. Residential temple lighting is no longer regulated by the same code that neighbors had assumed would protect them. Read that again. The law changed while the building went up, but the church is also moving on this front. Under pressure. In Fairview, the final permit requires exterior lighting to shut off between 11 at night and 5 in the morning. In Cody, the church publicly agreed to drop light intensity by 50% after the last person leaves at night, controlled by automatic timers and photocells. In Heber Valley, Utah, the church's own legal filings describe a lighting design meant to be, in their words, least impactful to the community. None of that was on the negotiating table 5 years ago. Lighting was sacred. Lighting was permanent. Lighting was the one thing the church refused to discuss. Now it is the first thing they offer. Change number 2. Lighting has moved from non-negotiable to primary bargaining chip. But the concessions on design and light only made sense once you understood the bigger picture. The thing that was shifting behind all of this. The thing that almost no one noticed because it happened in a single sentence at a pulpit in Salt Lake City. That is where the real turning point begins. Part 3. Salt Lake City hits the brakes. October 5, 2025. General Conference, the twice-yearly global broadcast of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Tens of millions of members watching. For almost every conference since October of 2017, the pattern had been the same. The president of the church would announce new temple locations, sometimes 12, sometimes 15, sometimes 17 in a single weekend. The announcements were the emotional climax of the broadcast. Members would gasp, members would cry. Members would immediately speculate about which city was next. Russell Nelson had died 8 days earlier, on September 27th. Dallin was now the new president. It was his first general conference in the top chair. He walked to the pulpit at the close of the Sunday afternoon session, and he said this. He said that with the large number of temples already in early planning and construction, it was appropriate to slow down the announcement of new temples. He said the quorum of the 12 apostles had approved the decision. And he said that no new temple locations would be announced at that conference. It was the first general conference in 8 years without a single new temple announcement. 8 years. A full generation of members had grown up expecting new temples every 6 months. That expectation ended in one sentence. Let that sit with you for a moment. Because the church does not use the word retreat. It does not use the word pause. It does not use the word overextension. But look at the numbers. 200 temples announced in under 8 years under Nelson, 57 still under construction, more than 100 still announced and unbuilt, some of them sitting in planning for years with no groundbreaking in sight. Legal bills piling up in 4 states simultaneously, mayors going on podcasts to call out the institution by name, neighborhood groups organizing on Facebook, Nextdoor, and TikTok in ways that would have been impossible in 2015. And behind closed doors in the church office building in Salt Lake City, the new leadership did the math. They looked at the construction pipeline. They looked at the legal exposure. They looked at the negative press from Texas and Wyoming and Utah. And they looked at the bandwidth of a building division that was already stretched across 3 continents. And the math said, slow down. Change number 3. The pace of the Nelson era is over. And the person who ended it is sitting in the chair Nelson used to sit in. But slowing the announcements did not solve the fights that were already in motion. It only focused them. And what happened in those courtrooms is the part of this story that should genuinely disturb you, whether you are a member of the church, a former member, or a neighbor who has never set foot inside a temple. Part 4. Winning without winning. Most people assume that when a zoning fight reaches a courtroom, a judge decides whether the building belongs there. That is not what happens. That is almost never what happens. Watch what actually happened in Cody. Preserve our Cody neighborhoods. A residents group, 2 years of fighting, 2 lawsuits, yard signs across the town. A formal appeal to the Wyoming Supreme Court. In June of 2025, the Wyoming Supreme Court ruled for the church, but read the opinion. The court did not say the temple was appropriate. The court did not say the 101-foot spire belonged in a residential neighborhood with a 30-foot height limit. The court said the residents missed a 30-day filing deadline. That was the entire basis of the ruling. A procedural window, a calendar. The justices themselves wrote, in their own words, that there had been a great deal of confusion in the process. And here is the line that should stop you cold. The church's own attorney stood in front of those justices and admitted that the city attorney in Cody had given the planning board bad advice. Advice that led directly to the approval the residents were trying to overturn. The church's attorney said the words, bad advice, and the church won anyway. Because the deadline was missed. The temple stayed. The 101-foot spire went up. The lights came on in March of 2026, and the neighbors started pricing blackout curtains. Heber Valley played out the same way. 4 residents sued Wasatch County. They argued the county had used a workaround called a legislative development agreement to skip standard zoning rules for an 88,000-square-foot temple with a 210-foot spire, more than double the height of the Cody Tower. A district court judge dismissed almost every substantive argument. The Utah Supreme Court lifted an injunction in early 2026. In court filings during that appeal, the church stated plainly that a delay of 12 to 19 months would cost them between $7.8 million and $11.4 million. $11.4 million for a delay on one building. That number tells you 2 things. It tells you how much money is moving through this construction program. And it tells you why the church's legal team is willing to file motion after motion to keep the timeline intact. Change number 4. The church has learned that substance does not decide these cases. Procedure decides these cases. And the church, with permanent legal counsel on retainer, plays the procedural game at a level no volunteer neighborhood group will ever match. Residents are running on donations and weekend meetings. The church is running on institutional legal infrastructure built over a century. The mismatch is not close. It is not even the same sport. Which brings us to the final change. The one that is quietly reshaping every temple conversation that has not happened yet. The one that explains why the fights in Texas and Wyoming may be the last of their kind. Part 5. The Quiet Playbook. Watch what the church is doing now, before the fights start. The new playbook has 3 moves, and all 3 are designed to eliminate public opposition before it can organize. Move 1. Buy the land first, announce the temple later. In the old Nelson model, the president would announce a city at general conference and the land acquisition would follow in public view. Residents would find out about a temple months before the deeds were signed. The new model flips the sequence. The church secures the property quietly, often through holding companies and real estate intermediaries, before the community knows what is coming. By the time the announcement lands, the land is already owned and the site plans are already drafted. Move 2. Open mediation immediately, with federal lawsuit notices in the background. The Fairview pattern in miniature. A cordial first meeting with the town council. A letter referencing the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, the federal statute that makes it almost impossible for a municipality to reject a religious building on zoning grounds alone. A formal notice of intent to sue if the negotiation stalls. The federal law is the pressure, the mediation is the performance, and it works. In Fairview, the mayor himself wrote to residents that the constant question he got was why a religious building could violate zoning rules that applied to everyone else. He said he knew the answer. He wrote that the answer was the federal statute, and that it did not seem right, but it was the law. That admission, from the mayor himself, in writing, to his own residents, tells you everything about the power dynamic. Move 3. Build concessions into the first public design. Spire height with room to drop. Lighting hours with room to shorten. Footprint with room to shrink. Parking with room to reduce. The council gets to claim a win. The residents get to claim they forced a compromise. And the church gets what it actually wanted from the beginning, which was always smaller than the opening number. This is not cynicism. This is documented strategy. You can read the letters in the Fairview court record. You can read the church's own legal filings in Heber Valley. You can watch the Cody case unfold in the Wyoming Supreme Court opinion. The playbook is in the public record. The public just has not read it. Change number 5. The church is no longer picking fights in public. It is ending them before they start. 5 changes: smaller designs, dimmed lights, slower announcements, procedural courtroom victories. Quiet land acquisition with mediation. First playbook backed by federal law. Put them together and a pattern emerges that the church will never describe in these terms. The Nelson era was about growth. Rapid, public, triumphant growth. 200 temples in 8 years. Announcements every 6 months. Groundbreakings every month. A pace that made members feel like they were living through a historic moment. The Oaks era is something else entirely. It is about absorption. Digesting the hundreds of temples already in motion. Finishing what Nelson started. Fighting fewer battles in public. Winning the remaining ones on technicalities instead of merits. Reshaping the relationship between the institution and the towns that host it. On one side of this shift, an institution with financial reserves measured in tens of billions of dollars, a permanent legal team, a federal statute written to protect religious land use, and a theological mandate to build these structures wherever its members live. On the other side, town councils with annual legal budgets smaller than what the church's outside council bills in a single week. Volunteer neighborhood groups funded by yard sign donations. Homeowners who never imagined they would spend 2 years of their lives fighting a religious organization in court. Every documented dispute has ended the same way. The temple gets built. The residents get a slightly smaller version of what they fought against. The mayor admits on camera that the decision was forced, and the institution moves to the next city on the list. The question is not whether the temples are going up. They are going up. All of them. The question is whether the people living next to them ever had a real choice. And if the answer is no, if the system is structured so that residents cannot win, and town councils cannot say no, and judges rule on deadlines instead of merits, then what we are watching is not a debate about architecture. It is a question about power. If this is the kind of investigation you want more of, the stories the mainstream outlets are not connecting, the institutional shifts happening inside the LDS Church that almost no one is covering. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel goes deeper. We are already working on the next investigation. See you there.